Look, I'm sorry, I brought you here under false pretenses. You thought this was a talk about raising kids. It's actually talk about you guys. If we talk about raising children to have good habits, then we can't talk about that unless we talk about the good habits that parents need to have. So that's where we're coming from. And in the process, we'll do a lot of talking about kids and best strategies with kids and lots of stories about kids. I want to show you some little videos that I've been producing which are really charming little numbers, just 1-minute videos which have parents talking about raising their children. And it's amazing what you can fit in 1 minute. The most important thing, however, today is that when you walk out, that you have a very clear game plan, that you have 1 or 2 points that you're really determined to try to put into practice in your own life. And that may be something that more pertains to your character, because we're talking a lot about character this afternoon, or it may be something that refers more to the way that you're dealing with your own kids or with your spouse. But let's go. Clicker, I'm sorry. I was supposed to have a clicker and we're in business. Okay, we'll test the system. Now this will get us thinking. Remember how influential we are supposed to be in the life of children. Okay, here we go. Let's see if we can make this work. 10 months old, his name is Isaac. He's getting his favourite toy put in front of him. He really wants it. This went down a treat in Canada because it's a Canadian moose.
What about the phone?
10 months old, guys, 10 months. That's what we're up against. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to move. I think we're going to move. Now, for these next few slides, this is the bad news, right? There's a lot of bad news at the start, but after that I hope we get into the good news. But I don't think we should be, we're not in the worst age of mankind's history, but there are a lot of negatives happening at the moment in the world around us, and a lot of these things are influencing your kids. And I don't think we need any convincing of that looking at the video that we were shown this morning by Christopher West, right? Where you realise so many young people are confused at university about really fundamental things about what human beings are. So Thomas Lacone is one of my heroes, but he's written some marvellous parenting books. If you come across one called Character Matters, then grab it. He's probably the wisest parenting author, I would say, in the States at the moment. And he wrote that in 1987, that comment, but he's already predicting a lot of things that are happening in the world today, big time, even worse. And I'd like just to draw your attention particularly to that growing self-centeredness, because I think this is a massive blind spot in our society. We think that we can have it both ways. We think we can have a really good life, comfortable life, and we think we can raise kids to be great citizens and great young men and women who are going to move on to paradise in the long run sort of stuff, right? And maybe we have another thing coming, right? We really have to give everything if we want to do a good job by the people who depend on us. And I'm talking to the converted in some sense, but gee, it's a big message. Obviously there are massive discrepancies in our world where we're neglecting the needs of a lot of people, vast sectors of mankind. We're neglecting their needs and we're justifying it. We're giving ourselves reasons. One of the themes that's going to come up as we go through the next 30 or 40 minutes is the idea that human beings, we're this wonderful integration of emotion and rationality. And sometimes we let the emotions run our life and we have to get on top of that. But sometimes we also give ourselves false reasons. And you can see that in our society we give ourselves all sorts of false reasons to justify being selfish. And you don't want to raise your kids that they have some self-justification happening in their own heads, that they can be selfish. Yesterday in the little presentation I showed the complaints book. The complaints book is from a fantastic guy who raises his kids to be very sensitive to the needs of kids people who don't have much, right? And whenever one of his children complains, he says, we'll get the complaints book. And he goes and he gets the complaints book is really something he's pasted together. On the left-hand side, it has kids who are, the picture I showed yesterday was this little chubby boy stuffing himself with French fries in McDonald's, pointing imperiously to this litre of Coke that he's got in front of him, right? And then next to it is kids from the starving Somalia or whatever, right? And that's the complaints book. But we have to raise children so that they don't give themselves reasons to be selfish. What else? What about commercialism, materialism? How rife it is. If you go into the new Terminal 4 in Melbourne and you go into the bathrooms there, and there's a corridor as you walk out of the bathrooms into this massive shopping foyer, and the last sign up on the wall in front of you is, "I love shopping." And then you're meant to walk out, read that, get sort of psychologically prepared, and then walk out and buy things, right? But I love shopping. I mean, in the end, we're being told what to love. Yet we should know what we should love. And it's not shopping. A few years ago, there was a fairly high-profile revisiting to the narcissistic personality inventory, which was first administered and designed in the US in the West Coast in maybe the mid-1980s. And the academic who produced that paper originally designed this questionnaire, and it was really specifying deep self-centeredness with a series of questions. They re-administered that same questionnaire to the same profile of students in the same university, same ages, same description. And surprise, surprise, they found that students now in 2012 were far more narcissistic than students of 1985. That's our world. That's our Western world at least, right? And this is your kids. Your kids are prone to be more selfish now than if they were raised 30 years ago. So we've got to do something about this. We've got to be very, very clear that I cannot raise my kids to be self-centred. And it's, we've got a lot of things working against us, haven't we? It's a great shot, but ultimately, what's this craze? All of the selfies that people take now, but they talk about 40% of the selfies that are posted on the net are actually enhanced. People have actually gone to the trouble of enhancing their photograph when they put it on the net. Bad enough to take it, and what's going on? You've got to think about it. And that's sort of harmless, but this isn't. Come on. Not that one. Well, no, there's a few other nasty ones here. Sorry, backtrack. My clicker is not clicking. That's Miranda Devine talking. These are all Banksy. Oh. You got to pause. Thanks, Byron. Try again. Where should I point this, Imran? Okay. So it really doesn't want to focus on that, does it? Okay. So Miranda Devine. I put that really because the phrase caught me, but that we've made children canaries in the coal mine of a sex-soaked culture. That in the end, we're setting them up to fall in what is such a primary area of their human development. And who's responsible for this? It's not the kids, it's us. We're the adults. We're the ones who manage this world for the kids. We're passing on a world to them that's safe, are we? So we should be jumping up and down when our society, when the leaders of our society are not giving our children a safe environment. And we should be knocking on their doors persistently until we get what we need for our children. And really, we've got to stand up to this. We can't put up with the barrage that is hitting your kids because they're the ones suffering, right? Look what Pope John Paul wrote in the letter to Australia, to Oceania, about the year 2000, or a little bit earlier, I think. When God is no longer at the centre of human life, then life itself becomes empty and meaningless. So that's pretty serious, but look where it's taken us, I hope. That's not a movie set. That's the stage at the DEFCON festival in Penrith 3 years ago. That's what young people are getting put in their faces, right? Actually, I sat next to somebody flying up to the DEFCON festival 2 weeks ago from Melbourne. I flew up to Sydney 2 weeks ago. And I said, there was a guy and a girl, right? They were both young professionals, right, going to something like this, right? And I said, I've got a confession to make, guys. I tried to shut you guys down a few years ago when I was a principal at Penrith. I wrote to the council who owns the property and said, shut these guys down. People are dying. There were 200 arrests for drugs and there were 200 overdoses at the concert, right? And one person died. And then they wrote me back and said, we've got a 5-year contract. We can't do anything. So I wrote to the police and then the police said, nothing. They didn't reply. It's amazing, isn't it? And now we've had how many more deaths at dance festivals in the last 2 years? So how serious are we about this? Are we going to stand up to it? This photo is from the Black Lives Matter protests in Baton Rouge about 2 months ago. Very impressive, isn't it? She's standing there serenely and the world is moving around her. But what are we going to stand up for? Because the world at the moment is a very unfriendly place for children at times, at least in the West. And the values it's passing on are very different to the values you're trying to pass on in your homes. So we really need to jump up and down a bit, or at least stand up. What I'm going to suggest the answer to all of this is not panic, but to focus on character. And first of all, to focus on our characters. Because if we want children to be the best people that they can be, we have to be the best example for them as possible. And I'm going to be talking a lot about emotional example in a few minutes, because with your emotions, you set the register of what your child loves in life. They see what you love, they will love it. We'll keep coming on this. What does it mean to flourish as a human being? Because we've got to have the goal in mind. We know that we all have different talents, and certainly intellectually, everybody's on a big spread. It's not a problem. In fact, it has no relevance practically whatsoever. And a person who struggles at school and who struggles even afterwards intellectually can have the most beautiful capacity for love. And we have to be giants in love. We have to be Einsteins in love. We don't have to be Einsteins intellectually. I think it's a really big point. That's what you're raising your kids to be. And they won't get it if you're not showing it. You may be familiar with that beautiful quote from John Paul. I love it. That love is so necessary in our lives. And if we don't manage to personalise this so the kids get it, then in the end, we betray them. We leave them thinking that life is about happiness in superficial ways. As one of our speakers said this morning, instead of taking them to the banquet, we take them to the fast food, and with all of the consequences. Which family is that? It's the Von Trapps. It's the actual Von Trapps. And it's the actual Von Trapps when the movie came out. Isn't that crazy? It's about 1967 or something like that. Your home is a school of love. It's where your kids learn to love. One very good friend of mine came very embarrassed to school one day, and he said, I don't believe it. My little daughter came into me yesterday and she said, Daddy, I know what you love. And he sort of puffed his chest out thinking she was going to say, you love Mum. Or she says, you love to sit on the couch, drink beer and watch the cricket. That was her summary of Dad's love life, right? Whoa, what's going on? So sometimes what we think we're showing to the kids, we're not showing. I'll come back to that. Of course, love gives strength. If we don't know how to infuse our homes with love, in the end the kids won't be strong enough to stand up to whatever else is happening. In those three quotes, I want you to focus on three things. First of all, the first quote reminds us that kids need habits. Second quote reminds us that an absolutely central habit to growing up is being able to look after others, having a commitment to others. You're raising your children for that. We're in a society where, every ad on television is telling us to look after ourselves. We've got this bullying crisis. We've got this crisis of people neglected in our streets, sleeping on the road. You know what's going on when you see 30-year-old fit people sort of sitting in the pavement? And nobody seems to care. And the bottom one is about self-giving. That in the end, if this doesn't lead us to give of ourselves, and obviously 2 and 3 are a bit related there. I put Oscar Wilde there for a reason, because it's a bit topical in the whole gender issue at the moment. But look what he says. This is when he came to his senses. He wrote this marvellous book called De Profundis when his life fell apart and he reflected on his life and he put down his thoughts. And he said, I was no longer the captain of my soul. I allowed pleasure to dominate me. Now, everyone comes from different directions, but there is a central reality there that we all face, that at times our emotions are unguided by our rationality and we don't make choices that are good for us. And the trouble is, the way we're built as human beings, the more we make choices, the more we consolidate that pathway of action and it becomes second nature to us, literally. I'm going to talk about virtues from various directions today, but when I do this, I'm not going to labour it, but where does the whole idea of virtue come from? So Aristotle, who's like one of the giants of sort of civilization, Aristotle wrote a book for his son called, we know it as the Nicomachean Ethics. And there's various theories about why it's called the Nicomachean Ethics, but it seems that it was a book that he gave to his boy Nicomachus. And it was an explanation of how to grow in virtue. It's still a treasure of civilization. And he sets out there the characteristics of virtue, and he sets out there the different types of virtues, and he ends with the idea that happiness is the reward of virtue. If we have good habits in our lives, then we make it possible to be happy, to be masters of ourselves. Remember he said I wasn't the captain of my soul. Well, with the full box and dice of the 4 cardinal virtues, we become captains of our soul. And I want to just talk about that for a moment. You'll see the 4 boxes down the right-hand side of that slide. The top 2 are about the emotions that constitute the sort of core emotions in our lives. Remember that Aristotle also, and you see it's still in every psychology book practically, and the psychologist just walked in, so I'm feeling very embarrassed here if I'm misquoting psychology. But core motivations in life are pain and pleasure, right? The things we do for pleasure and the things we do to avoid pain. They're core motivations. Aristotle said it's not just about that, it's about having refined attitudes to pain and pleasure, so that we seek pleasure in good things for us and we're prepared to put up with pain for a good reason. That's what those 2 boxes are. So the top box is seeking pleasure in the things that are good for us. And the second box is about being prepared to put up with difficulties and discomfort and pain and whatever for a good reason. We're going to keep coming back to this, but it's not about the kids, this is about us. If we can't do it, the kids can't do it. Pope John Paul II said that his father never had to be tough on him because he was so tough on himself. Wow. So we have to lead from the front, don't we? This one is about justice. And we've shrunk justice in our society to suit ourselves, I believe. Justice has become paying our taxes. Justice has become making sure that if we ding someone's car that we leave a note on their windscreen or something like this. But it's packaged in a way that doesn't actually cause us great discomfort in life. In fact, justice should be, I believe, about measuring all of our actions that we do the right thing by the people around us. Every single action. And if we think in those terms, then we will raise our kids to be very other person-centred. Otherwise, they will be self-centred. And the last one is prudence. But prudence is this ancient word, isn't it? But prudence is about setting goals for ourselves, setting priorities, facing what's right and wrong, living in reality, not living in a dream world. So Aristotle, again, he talks about how education is both of the mind and of the heart. And we've got to get both. And heart is obviously emotions, but not just emotions as in raw emotion. It's emotion expressed towards others in love. That sort of idea. Okay, let's look at virtue now in more detail. And this is going to be the substance of what I'm talking about now, but there'll be plenty of stories to go with this, so hang on. It looks worse than it is, that slide. Look at the red arrows. The red arrows, somebody presses your button, you can either react on impulse in the red, or you can process what's happened. And the big thick arrows on the right, in a sense, are habits of processing. So we got habits of processing our responses to pleasure and pain. We've got habits of thinking about things before we act, habits of thoughtfulness, and that gets us where we need to be. But if we don't have those habits down the right-hand side, we're much more likely to act on impulse. And this affects us, but affects the kids. If the kids don't have those light green habits, then in the end it's too easy to act on impulse. If we're talking about self-control, you know, Pope Francis just now in Amoris Laetitia, he talks about a number of areas of self-control, doesn't he? He talks about anger, how anger can destroy a family. He talks about dads getting lost in their gadgets. It's a pretty interesting problem. But most of the examples he gives are actually about people being very self-centred. They're mostly about justice and a lack of justice in our own lives. Very interesting. We'll come to that. They seem to me are some of the main areas where we've got to keep our eye if we're training kids to have self-control. But obviously this applies to us too. Knowing when to stop. Obedience is really big. If you don't train your kids to obey you, they will never be able to obey their own reason. Aristotle says children obey the reason of their parents. They learn to obey the reason of their parents so that afterwards they can obey their own reason. But if they don't have those pathways established of emotional subordination to rational reasons, then afterwards they won't be able to haul back on their own impulses. Does that make sense? This thing of attention, they know a lot about the way attention works in the brain now. They know that attention pathways are very much linked to the things that we desire. What we look at, we tend to value. So if a fast car goes past, the person who admires cars will look at it. We go to the art gallery if we admire art, if this is something that we love. We look at the things we love. How do your kids know what to love in life? By what you look at. They watch you. They watch what you watch on television. They watch what you read in the paper. They watch what you talk about. So what your kids pay attention to is certainly an indicator of self-control, but also it tells us a lot about our lack of self-control sometimes, the things we pay attention to. I mean, think grossly about pornography, for example, right? And the art form here is to raise kids so that as much as possible, they're attracted to the banquet, not to the fast food, to the good, the true and the beautiful. Big issue. I've got a few these 1-minute clips. Let's try this one, see if it works. This is a beautiful little one about how a family plants a love for music. Very simple, but isn't it interesting, right? Isn't it simple but interesting that we do the things we love? So we've really got to channel kids into the things that we know are going to be good for them and demonstrate the enthusiasm ourselves. He's in IT, but every night the musical instruments are out. So we're talking about a school of love, not just for the kids, obviously, but for ourselves. The schools that I'm involved in Sydney, the day that Redfield opened, which was 1986, I was there as a part-time teacher, so this is a long time ago, and we made a video of the first speech that the headmaster gave. I wasn't the headmaster then. And Frank Monagle, who's now, he's had this second life down in Melbourne starting another school. Frank Monagle's there, and the first thing he says to the parents is, you've got to realise that this is a school for parents as much as it is a school for kids. And 30 years out, it's borne out, right? It's interesting. So we've got to get this mentality ourselves. Let's talk about emotion for a few minutes. Clearly, we don't want emotion just to run our lives, but we don't want to blot out emotion as well. If we don't have emotion, we can't relate. Emotion's a beautiful thing. The virtue of justice relies on having a positive emotional reaction, but the virtue of temperance also relies on a positive emotional reaction to things that are good. For example, to music just then, right? So we've got to find emotion. We've got to find an emotional surge in the things that are good for us, not the things that are going to be damaging. And this is really, really basic, but so fundamental to parenting. And obviously a parent who's just dampening things all the time They're not going to really spark their children's love of anything. So we have to work on ourselves and realise we've got to fix our faces somewhat, right? I've got a friend who's a irascible personality. He got let down by a client on the phone. He's screaming at this client at night, and he's so angry, it's a self-control issue, it's a fortitude issue, but he's screaming at him. And then he realises his little 10-year-old boy is standing there looking at him. And Dad feels a bit bad about this, and the boy just turns around and walks out. Next weekend, he's a Maronite guy, and he's standing in Mass, and they've got confession during Mass. And his son's standing next to him, and looks up at his dad and says, "Well, Dad, you going to confession?" And Dad says, "Do you think I need to?" And the boy goes... And then the boy says to his dad, "Dad, I'll go with you if it helps." That's fantastic. I mean, he's humble. He told the story, right? It's a beautiful story. But the same guy told me this with his daughter. His daughter, he was so cranky with he gets cranky. He was so cranky with his daughter, and he decided, what I've got to do, I'm not going to get cranky. I love my daughter, I'm not going to get cranky with her. And he goes into the laundry, and he literally fixes his face, right? Composes himself, and when he thinks he's right, he walks out. And straight away, his daughter jumps behind Mum and says, "Daddy's got the face." He thought he had fixed his face, but he hadn't. What's going on? So, we really have to relearn this. We have to know. Help me, Imran. We have to know, we have to get it right with our faces, don't we? What's going on this face, on this 200 square centimetres? Who is responsible for the emotional tone in your home? You are. Your kids aren't. Ross Campbell, this wonderful book, How to Really Love Your Teenager. Probably the best book about raising teenagers, right? How to Really Love Your Teenager. He says it's the parents' responsibility to emotionally nourish their children, not the children's responsibility to emotionally nourish the parents. So what's the issue? We have to be above the weather, and we have to make sure that we're the ones who bring peace into the home. Doesn't matter what the kids say or do. We've got to respond with calm, with joy, with cheerfulness. Not easy. Certainly not easy. But this is how we pass on. This is how we pass on to them a really positive response in difficulties, right? The things that make us upset in the end on the scale of things are normally not very important, right? So why are we giving kids that emotional register? Why are we doing that? This point is probably the biggest single empowering point that people have said that they get out of these presentations about parenting. The most single useful idea, that I have to start to pay much more attention to what's going on here, because this is where my children learn what is of value in life. If you don't get your face right, you teach them all sorts of missed messages. We just had a session in there with the dads. I'm sorry, I'm talking about secret dad's business. I apologise. But it was embarrassing, right? That for all of us to realise that, a mere handful of people in there had conversations of depth with their own parents. A mere handful. And what's going on? I mean, how are we ever going to change the cycle unless we deliberately break the mould and start again? We're not criticising our parents. Our parents gave us our faith, right? But my goodness, there's a bit more to be done. And if we don't get this right, there's a whole lot of things that are enjoyable in our life that are going to sweep, or in the world, that are going to sweep the kids off their feet, and you're not going to be in the game. And your kids will struggle to keep their faith, and they'll struggle to keep their relationships and their marriages because they're living such superficial lives. We can learn something about this from cat food. How? I used to have a cat, and when it was time to feed the cat, you would tap the can. And the cat might be 5 kilometres away, but within 30 seconds it would be at your feet. It had been trained to associate the tap with food. Well, we also... Emotions are very anatomically based. We can condition our emotional reactions. We just have to work on it. The first time I did that, I'm sure the cat didn't come. But the 50th time, the cat was there like a flash. So the first time you struggle to smile when you walk in the door at night because you've had a tough day and you really don't want to smile, but you do, right? It doesn't come very naturally. But the 50th time, it comes fairly naturally. And we have to get this psychology happening in our world, you know, that by repeating good behaviours, they become part of us. And that's true at the level of pleasure, it's true at the level of managing fears and anxieties, and it's true at the level of putting other people first. And if we don't get those 3 packages in place in our lives, the kids will have one of those missing, and that's really serious. Okay, that's just saying the same thing. And motivation, of course, you know, the thing that motivates your kids, they do what they love. So think, what do I want my kids to love in life? They're the conditionings that I have to start to establish in their lives, but I have to model it myself, and that means a few readjustments sometimes. Think of the fears. You know, there was a lot of talk in next door there about fears that dads have. I'm sure there was no talk in here about mums and fears, right? But over there was. But how do we, you know, if we're not good at managing our own fears and anxieties, how can we teach kids to stride through the world? To do what that woman did in that picture where she's just standing there serenely. Are we going to stand up like that for our values? When we're trying to train kids for fortitude, I was talking about this once to a group of parents at Redfield. Then one of the mums straight away put up her hand and said, I get it. When a kid's old enough to walk, he's old enough to vacuum. It's good policy, isn't it? Get kids to do whatever they can do. Another rule, another corollary of that is mum doesn't do anything in the home when someone else can do it. Get the kids to do it. Otherwise, they're going to grow up with a learned helplessness, which is not what we want, is it? So dad's got to be a real mum protector, that he makes sure that mum doesn't do stuff that somebody else can do, in a sense, right? And mums, it's really important not to be indispensable, to make sure that the kids can fend for themselves, right? In a good sense, right? Give them a day when they cook. There's a sign up on one of the Carlton street signs where I live, on the back of the street sign says, "What would you die for?" Sort of very Fitzroy at the moment, that sort of thinking, but what would you die for? But in the end, what would we die for? I mean, that's what fortitude's about. I mean, Aristotle defines fortitude in terms of things that we're prepared to suffer great misfortune and give our lives for. That's his definition of fortitude. We've forgotten it, haven't we? Yet that was exactly what Christopher West was talking about this morning, that we're prepared to give our lives for stuff that's important. We're raising our kids to do that, or you're raising our kids to be comfortable. Big difference. Routines and timetables. We got to sweat the small stuff when we're teaching this, and also live the small stuff ourselves. Because fortitude is not normally sort of disarming a guy with a machete. Fortitude normally is sticking to our timetable, getting up without hitting the snooze button, all this sort of stuff, right? That's what fortitude is. So it's very good kids grow up with a timetable. Doesn't have to be sort of 15 points, might just be 4 points, but it's very good they do that. It's very good that they, there's a habit in the house. We clean up before we go away. We always clean up wherever we are before we go away. Simple things. We don't leave stuff on the sink. We don't leave our rooms messy. But there are deeper ones, aren't there, where we talk about, we model optimism, we smile even when it's difficult. Look at this beautiful example. This is a couple who've instrumental in starting a school in Melbourne. They've got 5 little kids. You'll see the kids in a minute. This is a very simple graph. And it says that good parenting comes back to 2 factors. Very simple message. Being high on affection and very clear on expectations. If we're very high on affection, but we deliver that affection, we package our expectations with affection, put it that way. We demand with affection, then the kids will come with us. But, we sometimes are not very good at that. One mum told me, she said, this is a big family with some older kids who taught little guy, Jamie, some very bad language. And he'd been given a time out because he used the F word. And he'd been sent up to his room. And he comes downstairs, mum's preparing lunch, and he says, I don't want to live in this family anymore. He's 4 years old, because I can't say, and he says the word, whenever I feel like it. So mum just keeps doing the carrots, right? And she says, oh, mate, where are you going to live? And he says, it's okay, you guys are going to have to move out. And then she tries another reason. She says, what are you going to eat? And he says, I'll take a banana from the bowl. It's okay. So she's tried reasons. Reasons are not cutting it. So then she plays her ace and she says, oh, mate, who's going to give you cuddles? And he goes all sort of Charlie Brown wrinkly, and he goes, oh, I think I made a mistake. Affection, right? We've got to be experts at affection. And it's not just true with 4-year-olds, it's true with teenagers, it's true with adults, right? We've got to be experts at showing affection. And if we're not, then we pay for it, right? And we lose people. The heart has reasons that the mind doesn't understand. We just got to deliver, right? So we've got to find ways to be, positive in a sense, even when things are difficult. One couple, this comes from a lady who has she was principal of a school, big school, and she told me that she was having a lot of problems with one teenager, and she and her husband were tearing their hair out, and they were so critical of this kid, and it was just spinning out, and it was getting worse. And then they sort of said, stop, come, let's sit down, let's make a list of all the positives that we can think about this child. And then we'll write down the things that we're not happy with. And we're not going to stop until our list of the positives is longer than the list of the negatives. And they said that single action changed their attitude towards their teenager. Afterwards, they approached the whole problem differently, much more positively. That was their experience, and it's real, right? It happened. We have to try to keep looking at ourselves, don't we? Another beautiful story from a parent, a Croatian dad who's just a champion out west at the last school I was at in Sydney. He said and his kids are champions, right? They're kids that are admired by the staff and by the students. They give their whole, they're great sportsmen, and they work their tails off in the classroom, and they're very popular. And one of them was a school captain last year. And the father said to me once, when so-and-so was in year 7, I wasn't happy with something that he'd done. So I talked to him seriously. And talking seriously for him meant talking in a lower voice, not a louder voice. He's a big man, but very gentle, but very clear. And he explained to his son he wasn't happy with something, and the son had tears in his eyes. He said, I was so proud of my son, he had tears in his eyes. But then, after a week, the behaviour came back. And then he said to himself, this is not my son's fault, this is my problem. This is my problem because my son has a good heart, but clearly I need to give him more support. That was the message he took away. So from that point onwards, every week he would sit down with his son and he would help his son come up with a goal for the week. And he's been doing that consistently now for a number of years, and I think that tends to explain why his kids are such champions. How much do we structure in talking one-on-one with the kids in our care, or do we raise them en masse? I'm not going to play every one of these videos, but I'll give you a website at the end where you can access them. I wanted to talk about Daniel. Daniel's one of the it's probably one of the major moments in my schooling very early on where this young man passed away. He was ill for a year with leukemia. There were overnight vigils of prayer with dozens and dozens of families coming up to the school from all over Sydney to pray for him, right? It was a tough time. And it, went up and down a bit, but eventually he did pass away. And his father gave a eulogy at this big mass at Our Lady of Lebanon in Harris Park. And he said, I just want to tell you that 2 weeks before Daniel died, he called me into his room. He was very restless. And I said, Daniel, what's up, mate? And he said, and remember, a lot of people have been praying for a full year for Daniel. And he's a normal 10-year-old kid going around kung fuing people and everything, right? And he says, Dad, I can't dream about anything except our Lord on the cross. 10 years old. That's what prayer does. We have to support our kids with prayer, right? And then he said, Dad, who was that prophet who took his son up the mountain? And Dad's sort of reading the play here, and he says, oh, do you mean Abraham? Yeah, the one who took Isaac up, and he was going to sacrifice Isaac. Dad, if God asked you to do that, what would you say? So he's preparing his father. So, in the end, raising kids is about being better ourselves, isn't it? And all the grace is there that Daniel is helping his dad prepare for his own death, right? And after Daniel died, it was just extraordinary, the stuff that the gifts that the family received. Obviously, it's tough. But we've got to realise that where we love, there's pain. That's part of the deal. And it was Daniel's class that met John Paul II. It was Daniel's class that came second in the state in mathematics, and they weren't even a selective class. I mean, it's just, how do you explain this? And big gifts in the family. Okay, let's keep going. Justice. I don't want to labour this too much, but it's a big blind spot to me. We have to raise kids so that they're compassionate, they pay attention to people, they're grateful. I give a session each year at ADFA to second-year military cadets, and I'm pretty impressed with the young people there, right? And one of the things I was realising is that although I was getting really good feedback on paper from the sessions, I wasn't getting many thank yous. And I was thinking, this is a bit funny. So I actually put into the next session and how, when we're sort of forming our character, guys, it's really important to be grateful. And a lot of people came up at the end of the session and said, thank you. I mean, come on. But we're not raising young people to be grateful. That's the issue. Teacher gives out papers in a class, they get a handful of thank yous. They won't necessarily get even half the class saying thank you. It's interesting, right? But our kids love what we love. If we love gratitude, then they will love it. Sorry, this is slow. I should do something about this. I'm not going to go stop on all of those. And the last one, of course, is prudence, right? And this thing of prudence is, think of three things. Goal setting, clear sense of right and wrong, and, whoa, did I do that? Thank you. But in the end, convictions are not enough. Convictions are crucial. We need to be able to give ourselves reasons for stuff, but we also have to have the conviction that other people are vitally important, that we are raised to care for others. Remember the definition of a person has grown up when they can care for others and want to. And we're raising kids to be like this, to dedicate their lives to others. If you don't raise your kids to dedicate their lives to others, they will have all sorts of sound judgment about looking after themselves, and their career plans all mapped out, their life plan mapped out, their holidays mapped out, but they won't care for others. And that's a tragedy. I'm skipping some of these, sorry, for reasons of time. What are we talking to the kids about? Obviously, we need to talk to them about what's going on in their media exposure. But look what Pope Benedict says about media. He doesn't say the most important thing is for the family to filter what's coming in. You've got to filter what's coming in. That's like 10% of the problem. The most important thing, your goal as a parent, is to form the conscience of your kids so that they can filter themselves. Very, very important. And that means you have to have a very, very personal dialogue happening with your kids. If your kids are not telling you what's happening in their lives, then how can you educate them? John Paul II again. I like Polish examples. What did his father do? When John Paul's mother died, when Carol's mother died, John Paul's dad took early leave from the army or early retirement, and each afternoon, Pope John Paul told us that his father would go for a long walk with him after school. And he did this for 5 or 6 or 7 years. Every afternoon they'll go for a long walk and a talk. And what did we get? We got John Paul, who has this massively broad education. He's fantastic with people. He's great with music. He's great with drama and literature. He's got this marvellous formation. And he didn't get that from school. He got it from his dad. And you can imagine Poland's about to get invaded by the Nazis. And what's happening? All of Dad's military friends are saying to him, come on, look, come back to the army. You know, I mean, and he said, no, I'm looking after my son. And he gave us John Paul II. Are you putting enough time into your boys, into your girls? That's the issue, right? That in the end, we don't know how much good's going to come out of this, but gee, we've got to invest ourselves with faith, with trust. Oh, I googled Lost in the Temple and I got Raiders of the Lost Ark. Does that say something about our civilization? Very simple point, but this is about raising kids with sound judgment. In the New Testament, we get this sort of insight into the way that Mary raised Jesus. Mary and Joseph raised Jesus. He's 12 years old. He's a perfect boy. Hasn't done anything wrong. It's perfect. But mum's the perfect mum. So she does what perfect mums do. What'd she do in that spot? First of all, she does the talking when they find him after 3 days and realise that they've raised him so that he's quite comfortable on his own in a big city for 3 days, and they don't find him whimpering. He's perfectly capable of looking after himself at 12 years of age. So they've raised him with quite a deal of sort of fortitude, right? In a good sense. But then what does she ask? She asks questions to get him to reflect on the causes of his actions and on the priority of his duties to others. Now, he hasn't done anything wrong, but again, it's the way we should be doing it. She says, why have you done this? And did you know how worried we would be? Isn't that interesting? So it's all about forming his own capacity to make choices based on his responsibilities towards others, justice. Obviously, charity comes in there big time if we've got some faith. Almost to the end. I'm stating what I've already said there, but gee, we've got to be so close. If we're not close to the kids, they don't tell us what's going in their lives, and if they don't tell us what's happening in their lives, we cannot educate them. One mum who raised 5 boys in the country in a very humble, very, very humble farmhouse with a dirt floor in a couple of the rooms, right? Like crazily humble. And she says, when one of my boys would come home from school and he looked a bit worried, I would put on the kettle, and I thought she was going to say, I'll ask him what happened. She says, I put on the kettle and I tell him a good story. And then he's so relaxed, then he starts to talk to mum. How wise is that? So how wise are you at getting your kids to respond, giving them space to talk to you without wrenching it out of them? You can't twist a kid's arm. You can't twist a teenager's arm and say, what happened today? You look stressed. It won't work. So ultimately, we've got to show that our convictions bring us happiness. Barbara Holborough launched Parenting for Character. She's this great, feisty, wonderful, feisty sort of magistrate who stood up for children's rights. She came and launched the book. She's got a walking... She's passed away now. She had a walking stick. She comes up to the lectern like this and she waves a walking stick at everyone and says, most people think that if you've got a walking stick, then you're deaf. I'm not deaf. But how can we expect kids not to complain if we complain? We can't complain. We can't complain about anything. Take it on the chin. It's an interesting problem. Michael, again, I talked about Michael yesterday, but I will repeat it because it's probably the big single moment in my schooling that's left a massive impression. 5? Thank you. Big moment. Michael was the head of history at Redfield, and kids loved him. They really, really admired him. He cared for them so much. He was a guy with grown-up daughters, and he got some sort of problem with his throat, and he kept teaching. We thought it was just laryngitis. Then it looked a bit more sinister. He kept teaching with a speaker on his hip, and then it turned out that it was something much nastier, and in the end it was a bone cancer that took him away, right? And I got a phone call from his wife to say, better come into the hospital because he's in palliative care and they don't think he's got much time. And I went in and Michael was there on the bed, unconscious practically, glazed-eyed, lying there for about an hour and a half, not saying a word. I'm there, his wife's there and his daughter's there. His daughter's a teacher as well. And then the most remarkable thing happened. This was like 4 days before Michael died. He sat up in bed and he eyeballed me and he eyeballed his daughter, and then he said, students must see Christ in their teachers. And then he flopped back into bed. And that was the only thing he said that day. Now, if it's true for teachers, how much more true it is for parents. That your kids must see Christ in you. They have to. Otherwise, they're not going to get it. And that's big ask, doesn't it? That's why we're talking about our characters here. It's a big, big issue. But it's worth investing ourselves in this, unpacking it. Sorry, wrong way. And a good little rule of thumb is love lives on sacrifice. I'm not going to shun the sacrifice. I'm going to, hang with it, which you're doing. And that's my second last slide. So invest in each other, big time. Because that's where your kids learn love, right? Your kids learn love because they see your love. And that's John Paul II talking again. Your kids learn love by watching you. So you've got to be so good at this. And that's the website. So if you want to go to Raise, if you're interested, check out raisetolove.com. It's a blog every fortnight that comes out with videos, little 1-minute videos, but also it's developing as a parenting resource. And at the moment it's just a free service, and it will remain a free service. I'm thinking of finding some way to sell it to schools, but I'm not in that space yet. So thanks very much for your attention. I'm sorry we don't have much time for questions. My email, if you want to send me anything, is apjm.vic@gmail.com. So you're welcome to get in touch with me. Thanks very much, Vic.